So again, the water level here was super low, and the pump managed to suck enough air to run dry, which means there was no water in the pump basket, or not enough. And the housing got hot enough to melt the pipe dope or the pipe sealant that was there on the discharge side, and also a little bit on the suction side. So I've already cut here in order to remove this discharge section, and I've cut here also to remove the suction side. And I'm going to be using high temp unions, which will allow the pump to get hot and not have to be replumbed, only just a mere channel lock tighten because of the O-rings that we have here on this. I could show you the O-ring here, right there. The O-ring there gets tightened upon, and if it does get warm and the pump gets hot, that could shrink a little bit, but nevertheless it's still there and doesn't have to be all unthreaded like we have done here with this one and cut and replumb. All we have to do is just crank it down and tighten it, and we would have stopped the leak. But ultimately you want to keep your water level up, and so either really paying attention to it every day, every other day in the summertime, or getting some kind of automatic water device that can add water every day with a timer. So I'm going to go ahead and start plumbing, and we'll show you how it works out once we get this all together. Having the discharge already removed, I want to show you how easy it is to put this high temp union. It just threads in. You don't need any pipe sealant because we have the O-ring that's there. Again, I showed you the O-ring with my finger. We're just going to tighten it by hand and then crank it down with the channel locks. And we can continue to glue up and over to get this leak fixed. Hand tight is pretty good. Most manufacturers recommend hand tight, as well as so do the Haywards. When you tighten those unions on, they don't want you using channel locks. They say hand tight. And because of the gaskets and the O-rings that we have here, that's really all we need. I'm going to crank it down a little bit with my channel locks. I use a bigger pair, like such. And because I need both hands, I'm going to go ahead and stop and crank it just a little bit, and then I'll continue plumbing. I'll show you everything when it's done. Also, I'm going to be doing the suction side, which is going to have another high temp union as well, just like one of those. Okay? Alright, thank you. Okay, so we have the discharge high temp union already in place, tightened, and a little bit more than hand tight with the channel locks that I showed you in the previous video. I cranked this one down. This one needs to be tight with the bottom piece of the union, the high temp union. There's two pieces to it, and so that needs to be pretty snug. And so in tightening it by hand, after cranking it with the channel locks on this one, it becomes tight, and then in turn tightens that one. So you only really need to grab this piece, and so that one's tight. And because it got hot, I think I showed in another video, after you cut it, it's pretty loose, pretty hand tight loose, which again we have the thread sealant, which is what we call pipe dope stick. It melts and just it loses its seal. So here we are loosening it by hand because it got hot. Had it not been hot, plumbing it in, this fitting, when someone plumbed it in, it was probably pretty tight, having to use the channel locks. But because it's got hot and it shrunk, that fitting shrinks, the pipe dope shrinks, and the fitting becomes more tapered, pointed to the front of the fitting, becoming loose. So there we have it. It's gonna come off. Then I'm gonna go ahead and remove the rest of that excess pipe dope by just rubbing the fitting around, scratching it off. You can use a rag if you want. So there's that piece. Again, I'm gonna use both hands, and so I'm gonna go ahead and get that new high temp fitting on the suction side. I'll come back. Okay, so in order to show you, I've already got it hand tightened, and you can give it a couple cranks on the outer piece of the union. Just grabbing it, trying to hold the pump a little bit, but giving it a crank by hand, you'll see that we can go a little bit more. And I've already cheated and went a few before putting it on camera because I need both hands. So it's just got to be a good snug. That's it. I mean, it's tight enough because it's got the O-rings. There's a gasket between the actual high temp union between the two pieces, and then there's also the O-ring that I showed you that goes up against the pump housing. So both gaskets snug tight, hand tight, and then a couple turns with the channel locks is sufficient enough. And if it gets hot again, that O-ring will maybe shrink a little bit but can be tightened again so that no cutting or plumbing has to be done. But they can really handle a lot of heat. So I've seen them go and get hot, and I've seen them last and not have to be replumbed, but however the pump basket will shrink because it got so hot, and you might have to replace the pump basket, the strainer basket here. This one survived, so but it got hot enough to melt the plumbing, so we're replumbing it. Okay, good job. Okay, so we have the two high temp unions completely installed, plumbed in. The two older pieces, this was the suction side I believe, and this was the discharge side. Again, when the whole housing gets hot, it's hot enough to shrink the sealant and shrink the fitting. So the fitting tapers. It has more of a taper than it did when it came from the factory before we plumbed it in. It got plumbed in years ago. This equipment is really was in good shape, lasted for a long time. But now we have the discharge replumbed up to there, and we have the suction side replumbed down to there. We're using a gray glue, and we're done. So I've been adding water since I got here, and it's not quite exactly where I want it to be, but I'm going to go ahead and put everything away, allowing also the glue to dry. And by the time I'm done and I turn the water off, I'll be able to fire it up and everything will be good. Good job.